Couple housekeeping things. Excuse me. Number one, address we're carrying is 5700 West Little York. My name is Keith Smith, K-E-S-E-S-M-I-T-H, HPD spokesman. We have one officer who discharged in this incident, and that will be first initial J, last name Castro. He has 11 years on and is assigned to the Narcotics Division. Some background here. This particular strip center has been hit by robbers a number of times in the last month, and so the property owner reached out to the officer about hiring uniformed officers to work security. That's what Officer Castro was doing this evening when he noticed a black male wearing a hoodie, riding a bicycle, come up along in front of the Little Caesars here, peering in, and then riding his bicycle slowly along as if he's trying to peer into some of the other businesses here. The description we have of robbers in this area over the last month are black males wearing hoodies who then go into small businesses and rob the establishments and the customers who are inside. As I said, this particular location has been struck a number of times as of recently. The officer, realizing he matches the possible description of the robbers that have struck in the past, goes to approach the suspect. The officer's in his personal vehicle. The suspect on his bicycle sees the officer, makes a U-turn out of the parking lot, and starts riding off. The officer then drives up next to him, rolls down the window, and tries to engage him in conversation. The entire time the suspect is ignoring the officer, refusing commands to stop. He eventually does, and the officer gets out and approaches and talks to him. The officer asks him for identification, and the suspect refused to provide any, stating he didn't have any. and then he told the officer that he was not going to jail. At that point in time, the officer wants to do further investigation. He goes to attempt to detain him, and the suspect gets off his bicycle, drops the bicycle, and starts walking off. And as he's doing so, he's fidgeting in his front waistband the entire time. The officer then draws his weapon, orders him to stop. The suspect initially complies, gets down on the ground. When the officer, for safety reasons, goes to reholster his weapon and place the suspect into handcuffs, the suspect then leaped up and struggled with the officer, and then took off running across the parking lot past Little Caesars to the back. And again, he's got his hands in his waistband during that initial encounter. When they round the corner, it's very dimly lit back there. I mean, almost black. And he runs initially towards a bayou, and then turns to the officer, who's a short distance away. He'd been pursuing him on foot the entire time. Turns towards the officer, puts his hands again in his waistband, crouches down, and charges the officer, telling the officer, "I told you I'm not going to jail." At that point in time, the officer, fearing that he was reaching for a weapon and charging him, fearing for his safety, discharged his duty weapon one time, striking the suspect.
The suspect, is he deceased here?
The suspect was pronounced dead at the scene. The officer was not hurt.
Was the officer in uniform?
The officer was in uniform. Clearly, he's identified himself as an officer to the suspect in that whole conversation and encounter leading up to first that initial struggle and then foot pursuit. And the entire time that foot pursuit is going on, the officer, again in uniform, is telling the suspect that he needs to stop. And the suspect is refusing to comply. And again, then he rounds that corner. It's dark, and turns towards the officer, crouches down, puts his hands in the waistband, and charges at the officer, stating that he was not going back to jail.
Was any weapon found on the suspect?
We're still looking at this time.
You said the suspect dumped the bicycle and began walking off?
Well, he initially tried to. In fact, the bicycle's on the other side of that white vehicle there. He got off his bicycle. During that portion of the encounter, the officer is telling him to keep his hands on the bicycle so that he can see where his hands are. And that was when he then dropped the bicycle, disregarding the officer's commands, and started walking off, again reaching into his front waistband, fidgeting with his front waistband. So the officer at that point in time, not knowing if he had a weapon or not, drew his duty weapon, ordered the suspect on the ground. When the suspect initially complied, he reholstered his weapon to place that suspect in handcuffs to detain him for further investigation. And then once the suspect realized that the duty weapon was in the holster, he immediately leaped up, struggled with the officer, and then ran across the parking lot with the officer in pursuit on foot. Criminal Affairs Divisions, as well as the Harris County District Attorney's Office. I know the question you're all going to get is this suspect related to the robberies that the Chief talked about at the media availability today? At this point in time, it's too soon to say. That's something robbery and homicide are going to have to get together with and determine. I don't think we'll have an answer for you on that tomorrow either.